So I'd like to start out by asking each of you to move a chair over. I don't care which way you move, but I invite you to move. Just move. Okay, so that's about change, right? Is anybody besides
We're looking at it.
uncomfortable with that? You know, it's change and loss. Change doesn't always lead to loss, but loss is typically a part of change, right? And it might even be something that we wanted to do in terms of moving our chair, although regularly not. Regularly changing our chair isn't something. We're settled. We like where we were. I mean, it's like I moved from there to here. That was a change. I don't know how different this is for you. It's a little bit different for me. And change is unsettling, even when we choose it. So the thing that I'm passionate about, spreading a message as far and wide as I can, is that learning how to be with small losses, small changes, builds the muscle so that we can do better when the inevitable big stuff comes along. Because it's coming. Think about all the changes, all the losses that you've already experienced in your life. Was anybody born in Manhattan, Kansas? And you chose to stay here? Okay. And you maybe have dreams of having gone away, and the not fulfillment yet of those dreams, is that a loss? A small one perhaps, but one that maybe is a part of your life, a part of the fabric, the texture. And how does that define who we are? We can choose to look at it differently than a loss, but still sometimes, especially in the holiday season for me, you know, I like the holidays, but there are parts of them that make me sad. Anybody else with me on that? I mean, my family, all of my family, is on the East Coast. I was in North Carolina last weekend, literally, giving a talk similar to this about hope instead of peace, since we're doing the Advent candles in Unity churches. And even last week, I wasn't with my family. Last Sunday, I was with them at Thanksgiving. That's our big holiday. And for a lot of families, that's perhaps the case, but for more people, certainly in our society, I think, it's structured around Christmas. And I'm not with my family on Christmas. Now, sometimes that's good, and other times, that makes me a little sad. It's a loss. It's a choice. I could be, but it's a loss. 12 years ago, my mom died. That was a big loss. I was one of those fortunate people that had really cleaned up my relationship with my mom a lot by the time she unexpectedly died from a routine heart procedure. But it all moved so fast. And it was really very unexpected. And she was 72 years old. So, you know, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40, 50 years ago, maybe that was older, but it seemed really young to me to lose my mom. And it seemed young to my siblings, too. That was a big loss for me. And in some ways, I've been on this journey about loss and grief and bereavement and making sense of it in a way that supports me all of my life. When I was 9, going on 10, my family moved from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in the Midwest, which I loved, to Northern Virginia, where my dad had a job with the federal government. And the selling point that my mom made about this, which now that I look back really makes me laugh, was children in Virginia are very polite. They say yes, ma'am, and no, sir. And as a 9-year-old going on 10, that was not a real big selling point to me to go to Virginia for that reason. Not at all. Not to leave all of the family that I knew in Milwaukee. I was surrounded by family, by neighbors. I had a plan that I presented to my mom about staying and moving every 2 weeks from family members and from neighbors. And to my surprise, she listened, which gave me hope that I might really, this is a good plan. You know, every question she asked, how are you going to get to school? Well, I'm going to learn how to ride the bus. Grandma Birdie rides the bus. It can't be that difficult. I mean, I really had hope that since she was listening so closely, that my plan had a chance. And the final word on it was, young lady, you are a part of this family, and you are moving with us to Northern Virginia. So for 2 years, I made myself so sad. Looking back now, I carried the grief for our family during that time frame. Because my mom was one of those people who really believed that there was a silver lining in every cloud and that it was imperative that we find it and live it. She would have been a great person for what I will call euphemistically unity light. You know the unity folks that I'm talking about, where they shut off every conversation of depth and of emotion and of sadness and of hurt with, oh, but God is good. It'll be fine. All is well. I reject wholeheartedly that kind of new thought and of unity thinking, because I don't believe that it serves us. I think that the benefit of learning how to be with loss and change and grief and bereavement, of allowing it to move through us, of allowing it to be with us when it is ours to be with, and to not hold on to it, is that when we shut down, is that when we allow that to happen, we no longer shut down this end of the spectrum, whatever this end is. And so we also no longer shut down this end of the spectrum either. So we get our full range of emotion back when we allow the emotions that we are feeling to move through us, to not hold on, to not grab them in a way that doesn't have freedom for them, for us, for our expression. That's why I care about the message of loss and change and grief and bereavement, because it gives us emotional freedom. It allows us full expression, and it allows us to be the Christ presence that we claim in the unity movement and in the world. In the Bible, Jesus didn't turn away hurting people. He was there with them. One of the things that I think happens in our society on a regular basis is that we move away from people who are hurting as if it is somehow contagious. And in fact, maybe it is. If I touch the depth of your pain, if I have unhealed places, unhealed events, unspoken, unreleased areas, I can't share with you because I'm too busy dealing with my own pain. Even if it's just an emotional distance that I've created there. So when I'm talking with people, and perhaps it's true for you too, when I'm talking with someone and they share something where suddenly I'm off in my own thoughts, the likelihood is they've touched on a space that I would like to spend some time with in order to fully heal it. Because sadness and upset and even any emotion, happiness, joy, they're all, I think, sort of like onions, where we get this layer and then, a year later, 6 months later, however later, 10 years later, a decade, whatever, we think about it again and there's a new layer, there's a different layer, there's a deeper, a more tender layer. Judith Borst, in her book Necessary Losses, which I love, it's an oldie but goodie, it's a 1986 book, she talks about the fact that there are 4 losses that are perhaps intrinsic to human beings. And I don't want to get these wrong, so I'm going to look at my notes. She talks first about the losses of childhood and the fact that we need to become our separate self. And I know for me that I was probably well into adulthood before I genuinely became my separate self, before I genuinely wasn't a reflection, or whatever the inverse of reflection is, of both my parents, my dad and my mom, because I love them dearly, and they infuriate me sometimes. Not so much anymore, because I've done a lot of work with it, but that kind of loving them dearly, never wanting to let them go, and being infuriated, for me, are hallmark signs that I'm way too attached, and that it's not about them, me, it's about we woven together in a way that just really isn't very healthy. So it's a necessary loss that we become our separate self. The second one that Judith talks about is the loss of accepting our limitation of power and potentials, including the forbidden and the impossible. And in the book here, she talks about the fact that we typically want to marry one of our parents. And I think that in today's gender world, that it does make sense that girls want to marry their fathers and that boys want to marry their moms. But I also think that we've come to understand that gender is really a lot more mixture than we ever understood before. And so there may also be a part of me that wanted to marry my mom. And in fact, I think I did in both of my marriages, which is why I'm twice divorced, but I won't go into that. And then the third, losses of those dreams of ideal relationships to the reality of imperfect human connections. So for me, there's a piece of this, yes, that is my divorces, but it's also that my dad is always going to be who he is. And so is my mom, and so are my siblings, and so are all the people that I care about, including me. I would love to be perfect. And there was a time in my life when I genuinely believed I could achieve that. And then I went to therapy. And my therapists, the several that I saw, helped me to understand that perfection is a dream, and it's something to strive for. And perfection may well change on a regular basis. The perfect person that I aspire to be today, I don't think is who I would have aspired to be in my 30s or 40s, or even my 50s. And goodness knows what the 70s and 80s have in store for me. And then this fourth necessary loss that I've talked a little bit about is losses of people that we love. And Judah says to death, but I also think that it's losses of people that we love to life circumstances. When I think about all of the kinds of losses that we experience on a regular basis, when I was visiting in North Carolina, I had an opportunity over the past month to spend some really protracted time with family members in their family units, which was such a gift because I connected with siblings and with my dad in ways that I haven't perhaps forever in my life, because there was a lot of time for one-on-one. There was not just quality of time, although that came out of the quantity of time that we had together. And I had this opportunity to spend time with my youngest nephew, who is 16 and half a foot taller than I am and driving, and this basketball gangly guy. And, you know, the last time I remember really seeing him, you know, and really connecting with him was a long time ago. And my sister and brother-in-law are in the process of being empty nesters. In another 4 years, all the boys, all 3 of their boys, will be out of the house, will be either graduated or in the process of graduating from college. And that's huge. It's not an experience that I've ever had because I don't have children. And if perhaps some of you are in that situation, that's a loss all by itself. Now, I regularly chose not to have kids, and yet, it's a sadness now. And I'd really like to have grandkids. Now, somehow that, you know, moving through that, that's going to be an interesting prospect if that shows up in my life. And so maybe for you, there are losses like that. Maybe they're different. Maybe it's the loss of a pet that has been a part of your life for a really long time. Maybe it's a house where you lived. Maybe it's as simple as the movement from season to season. We have all of these changes to practice loss, to practice acceptance, to practice allowing things to move through us, to practice talking to others and sharing, and particularly in unity, more so I think than in a lot of other communities. We have this invitation to do this with unconditional love, so that we are listening with generous listening, with open hearts, with as little judgment as we can muster. And just allowing people to be exactly the way that they are in the moment that they are. There aren't a lot of places in our culture, in our society, in this world, where that happens. And as I think about it, that may be one of the reasons why online communities are so lovely for some people. Because I think that there, that is found. It's also true, I believe, in unity communities. But I also think that one of the things that we do in unity is this judgment of, oh, you know, it'll be okay. God is good. God is everywhere present. You know, just let time go by. Rather than just letting people be exactly where they are and knowing, expressing that we accept them that way. And moreover, that we see in Unity Vernacular, we see the Christ within, which I think is another way of saying, you know, you have the wisdom within you. You have the wisdom within you. You have the wisdom within you. The wisdom within is there, it's available, and no one needs to fix you. You are as you are, and we hold that perfection. We know that we are in the right and perfect place. We expect that we will receive gifts from this. I think that part of our work is to look for those gifts for ourselves, because what we model is really important for others. The newest research on grief and loss shatters the idea that grief is a 5-stage process, the Kubler-Ross model that we all know so well. And it talks about, George Bonanno is a researcher that's been actually doing research. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, in her book on death and dying, did not research what we've come to know as the 5 stages of grief. It was a group of graduate students that she talked to about, wouldn't it be a good idea to go talk to people who are dying and to see what their experience of death is. So there's number one, they were talking to people who were dying, not to people who were left behind and grieving. Number two, it was not organized. It was absolutely extemporaneous questions that each graduate student came up on their own, and maybe or maybe didn't take notes on in their conversations, that had no linear research, no organized questions about it. And then they all got together and talked about it, and then Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote a book about what she heard these graduates say they remembered from these conversations they had with these dying people, and oh, by the way, some of their families. And so Elizabeth Kubler-Ross added a great deal to our understanding about death and dying, but this idea that there's a 5-stage grief process really is inaccurate, because current research, which is genuine scientific research, is showing that 45% of people who have a traumatic loss, within 6 months of that loss, are back to living their lives on a pretty even keel. 6 months. How many people thought that it was 2 years at least that you had to grieve somebody or grieve a situation? I grieved my mom for 2 years. I'm pretty sure that one of the reasons that I did is because I wanted to prove how important she was to me. And I didn't want anybody looking down on me that I was doing it in a shorter period of time than the regular amount of time that they say. And let me add on 6 months just in case you didn't notice she's really important to me. So how many of us do those kinds of things? Simply because we're told culturally, socially, that that's the appropriate thing to do. One of the new pieces of research also talks about the oscillatory nature of emotions, which absolutely makes sense to me. And the finding that even in the days immediately following a loss, that there are brief bursts of absolute joy and happiness as we remember something about the lost person or situation that gave us happiness and joy. And that that is a part of the grief process, and that it moves through people when they allow it, and then there's also sadness, yes. There's also an interesting thing that was discovered by George Bonanno and his compatriots in this research, and that is 5% of people immediately experience joy and happiness as if whatever it was that was the loss was pulling them down and depressing them. So they never, well, never is a big word, they don't have a very long period of what we would consider grief and sadness over a loss, even though the situation or person was quite important to them. So grief and loss is, there's a new science around it. There's new interesting facts that are coming out about it that are freeing facts for us. I think that one of the things I love poems. I love writings. And I used to write out my Sunday talks and really polish them. And I discovered that when I did that, I grew more attached to the words and the crafting and the time and attention that I'd put on paper than I was in being interested in connecting with you and sharing with you and having a heart connection. So I don't write out my talks anymore. I just give myself notes. But I do use poems still a lot. And I'd like to close with a poem by Robert Frost. And this is probably familiar to many of you. The Road Not Taken. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood. And sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passage there had warned them both really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I marked the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere, ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. I hold for you that you, too, can see the gift your choices make in your life. And that you celebrate the changes. You mourn the losses. And that you claim your full spectrum of emotional freedom in a way that truly gives you peace and joy and hope and love. Namaste.